Recollections of a Soldier would like to respectfully introduce to you the memoir of author BCSNA, veteran of Company 1 Battalion 1 Regiment 812 Division 309. We invite you to listen to Part 1. Before we step back into the smoke and fire of the battlefield to relive these unforgettable memories, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps ensure that the sacrifices and the youth of these soldiers are never forgotten. Now let's return to the front lines. In early 1979, as soon as we set foot in Battambang, we were immediately swept into that year's dry season campaign. We marched by day and rested by night, going from one place to another, sweeping to liberate the Cambodian people. Wherever the Vietnamese troops arrived, the Cambodian people would retreat. The people carried their belongings on shoulder poles and in their arms. Occasionally we saw a few ox carts with huge iron-rimmed wheels, reminding me of the scenes in the Vietnamese countryside in the 1960s, because later on most people had switched to pneumatic tires to avoid damaging the roads and to make movement much lighter. At that time, observing the groups of Cambodian people returning to their homeland, I felt delighted to see their creativity. They had an ox, and then they took 2 forest trees, tied crossbars to them, like a ladder, to create a place for belongings or for the elderly and children to sit. One end of the trees was tied to the ox and the other end dragged on the road surface. And just like that, they had an ox cart that looked quite funny. The return journey of the Cambodian people was impoverished like that. But saying so, it seemed they were still richer than the Vietnamese soldiers because they still had cigarettes to puff on and always had enough water to drink. Therefore, I thought I had to learn the Cambodian language from then on and only needed to learn 2 phrases, asking for drinking water and asking for tobacco. And in fact, it helped me a lot. Ending the long march of sweeping operations, my unit began to perform the duty of holding positions. From then on, Regiment 812 bore the nickname the Holding Regiment. Back then, to prevent the Pol Pot troops from clinging and attacking every day, we had to wade through the forest, eat rice balls, and patrol at least 2 kilometers away from the stationing area. First was when we held the position on Route 5. This was perhaps the most glorious period in the life of a holding soldier, because this was a flat area with inhabitants. Being a flat area, finding fish and vegetables was easy. Occasionally, we could also ask for some tobacco. At that time, because they had just returned, the Cambodian people were also very poor. Sometimes people came to the unit to ask for rice to cook porridge for their children. However, asking for 1 can of rice to cook porridge was not enough. They demanded 4 cans to be enough to cook porridge. The people were like that, but our soldiers weren't naive either. So there was a verse, slowly feet step down into the ditch/hands hold the trap, but the heart loves the compatriots. Only then could we have fish to eat. Now back to learning the Khmer language. Fortunately, at that time, near the stationing area, there was an old lady who was an overseas Vietnamese, so we kept hanging around to chat for fun and learn the language. I don't know why the soldiers stationed there before called her the Grenade Lady, and just like that, the soldiers in my unit followed suit and called her that. But she remained cheerful as usual. Perhaps after a traumatic event, meeting people from the same homeland was the happiest and most precious thing. Nothing could compare. So we learned a little to be able to talk to the Cambodian people. But young men had to be stylish, had to know slang and vulgar phrases to deal with the cheeky youth. That was the calculation, but we couldn't ask the old lady. So we dragged the kids around 11 or 12 years old to a quiet place and gestured to ask them. They laughed heartily and spoke very honestly. We learned a bunch of Cambodian words. Now we could constantly use vulgarities and swear like anyone else. If we didn't know how to learn and tried to learn from those young guys, they would trick us to death. I remember once a group of Cambodian boys and girls were walking on the road. Seeing our volunteer troops and wanting to show off that they knew Vietnamese, a girl immediately uttered, "Brother, give me a pho." It made us all laugh, our heads off. But seeing that they took it as delight and continued, we really had to hand it to our young guys. Telling the story the soldier's life was truly fun. Besides the main specialization of walking, that's why it's called infantry, I also participated in all types of movement. From hopping on trucks to clinging to the roof of T-54 tanks while moving and fighting. Thinking back, it was truly reckless. In one day we advanced and liberated more than 30 kilometers. Then later we moved by plane. The only pity was that the C-130 was too old. Looking through the opaque window, we couldn't see anything. The only thing I dreaded was the time I became a reluctant Marine. That was the trip to Preek Pring for a sweep operation. It was entirely a riverine area. It seemed to be near the Tone Sap Lake, and I didn't know how to swim. It was the floating season, and the water covered the treetops, so from afar we only saw a tree protruding above the water surface. I remember that day a guy named Hai P from P.1 borrowed a boat from the locals to go pick water spinach alone. But the trip out was fine. On the way back, the boat suddenly got a hole in the bottom. In the blink of an eye, the boat sank. Fortunately, he managed to grab a tree about the size of an ankle nearby. So he just hugged the tree and soaked in the water, waiting for his luck. Luckily, about 3 or 4 hours later, a local fishing boat passed by, saw him, and fished him out. Only then did the person who lent the boat remember that their boat had a big hole, and they had stuffed a shirt in it and plastered it with clay. When lending it, they thought the soldier knew how to swim, so they didn't warn him beforehand. In that area, looking at the fish was mesmerizing, but we couldn't catch them because we didn't have hooks. The locals lived by fishing. They used nets to catch perch, nearly as big as a hand, to use as bait. They set a rod with 2 hooks, one hooked into the head, one hooked into the tail of the fish. The fish kept swimming on the water surface. The snakehead fish, seeing it as an eyesore, would snap at it and swallow it whole. Some bit so hard that the hook went into the stomach and the bait fish was thrown up to the tip of the rod. You can surely imagine that the snakehead fish must be at least the size of a calf. Once I even saw them empty a trap. Inside was a catfish about 1.5 meters long. It was a feast for the eyes. Fish were plentiful, but the soldiers were still hungry for fish, because we had no hooks and no boats to go fishing. Occasionally a snakehead fish about the size of an ankle would glide near the shore, and we would shoot it to satisfy our craving, but it wasn't worth it. So the old song was sung again, but this time the lyrics were feet step down into the river. But instead of carrying a trap now, I was pouring out the eel trap. I hope that if you hear this, you won't tell on us. If the Cambodian people knew, they would curse us to death. Being a soldier but worrying about eating and drinking all this time is a bit shameful, so today I decided I must go fight. First, allow me to quote from the book The Forced War by Uncle Ngai Nvnh, the commander of Division 309. However, with the hot weather, the troops having to move a lot, the amount of water carried could not compensate for the amount of water lost in the body during the day. Therefore, while Regiment 31 attacked up to Phom and captured all objectives, Infantry Regiment 812 was still about 2 or 3 kilometers away and could not advance. Many comrades fainted from thirst and had to be evacuated to the rear. The attack direction of Infantry Regiment 812 was unsuccessful. End quote. To say like Uncle A. Cheng is truly unjust for Regiment 812. The fact is, in that battle, my Battalion 1, when setting out based on reconnaissance reports that water would be scarce, the higher command actively asked Cambodian porters to carry water. So the troops went ahead and the porters carried water behind. But only until the second day the porters had to hand over the remaining water to the unit, because they were afraid that if they continued, they wouldn't have enough water to return. So after marching for about another day, the water carried along also ran out completely, and we didn't encounter any stream or puddle. Thus began the journey of thirst and hunger. Hungry because without water we didn't dare to chew roasted rice. At this time we cut vines to find water to drink, then looked for rainwater collected in tree hollows. At first we used leaves rolled up to make spoons to scoop water. But then the water in the tree hollows wasn't enough to scoop anymore. We came up with the idea of breaking small grass stems to suck water from the tree hollows. Sucking like that, we could get a little water without stirring up the sediment. And then the water in the tree hollows also dried up. At that point, we couldn't keep the marching direction anymore, but had to cut across according to the map to find water. Finally, we found a large stream, but then we were extremely disappointed because it was a dry stream, although it was about 4 or 5 meters deep. And according to the map, it was a perennial stream, not a seasonal one. So the whole battalion had to brave the danger and rush down into the stream to dig for water. But even after digging down to a meter, there was only damp sand, not a single drop of water. At that time, walking along the stream bed to find water, if unfortunately the enemy was on the bank, they only needed to throw stones to kill us all, let alone shoot. Only at night did we go up to the bank to sleep. Many guys tried to urinate to drink, but unfortunately it was both pungent and salty. Even trying hard, they couldn't swallow it. At that time, dragging ourselves about 1 kilometer a day, the brothers started burying ammunition in the stream bed, keeping only enough to commit suicide if we encountered the enemy. But if fate didn't let us die, heaven would save us. On the final night of despair, it rained. Oh, the brothers hurriedly stretched out ponchos to catch the water. The joy of escaping death was indescribable, and it was truly heaven saving us, because after each person caught a canteen of water, the sky dried up as if nothing had happened. And in the following days, every evening dark clouds would cover the sky. When all kinds of ponchos were stretched out, that was when the sky started to clear. Thanks to that life-saving rain, the battalion could grope its way out to the road to return. When reaching the road for a stretch, we met a small lake where the water had dried up to the level of back to very little water/milk coffee, but the scene was very vivid: people bathing and washing buffaloes and cows, bathing people carrying water back, and our unit bathing, cooking and drinking deliciously. Returning to Route 10 in those days. One day following the custom, the last guard shift had to wake up the cooks to make rice so that in the morning we could go patrol the road, guard the road. That day it was my turn to guard for the cooks to make rice. The sunken kitchen was halfway down the slope on the way to the stream. Just as the fire was kindled to put the rice pot on, suddenly flashes appeared from the direction of the stream. Flashes of B-40 rockets exploding right in front of us, plus a series of AK bullets whizzing by. The two of us only had time to lie flat on the ground and wait. A few minutes later, after the AK burst ended, the mountains and forests fell silent again. I knew the Pol Pot troops had withdrawn, leaving only the smell of burnt gunpowder, and the morning meal continued. On Route 10, this ambush refrain was very familiar. First they fired a burst of arcs, followed by rapid-fire B-40, and ending with a burst of axe. That day we were unharmed because we managed to hide in the sunken kitchen to avoid AK bullets, and the B-40 rounds were blocked by the bamboo clump, so they all exploded on the bamboo clump in front. But because it was still dark, seeing the explosion flashes, even though they were more than 10 meters away, felt like they were right in front of our faces. I remember one day the whole company went on an operation within the formation of Battalion 1. Only a few brothers addicted to chloroquine, that is, having malaria, remained at home. The mountain and forest scenery then was so quiet, especially at twilight. Looking out at the newly cleared forest patch, to limit the enemy's ambush range, the darker it got, the more worried the brothers became. If the enemy knew the whole company was away on a sweep and attacked, where would we get the firepower to fight back? Finally, the brothers came up with a solution: take rusty oil drums with holes in the bottom place, then scattered on the trench edge around the outpost, then stick an AK barrel inside, pointing towards the forest, and fire a few bursts. The sound of the AK then sounded loud and warm, and the sound of bullets tearing through the air into the forest across the cleared patch sounded exactly like a 12.7mm machine gun. So everyone felt reassured, and every afternoon we would fire a few shots here and there. I don't know if the enemy didn't come to this area or if they came but thought there were many 12.7mm guns deployed inside, so we didn't see them creeping in. So a few days passed peacefully until the company returned. Upon arriving, the brothers saw the homemade 12.7mm guns and couldn't help but laugh. Back to Battambang. After being handed over to Regiment 812 for the first time, I understood what infantry meant, with full military gear and weapons, starting to wade through the forest up to the border. After walking for only half a day, both feet were blistered. I had to take off my shoes, wear sandals, and limp along. Walking forever, we finally reached the temporary stationing area. The first time guarding at night in the forest pitch black, everyone was tense. A guard post of Company 2 reported detecting a very large enemy force marching, didn't dare shoot, and immediately asked for instructions from superiors. So the whole battalion was alerted for combat. The companies deployed their formations. When I reached the combat position, just as I sat down, I felt a sharp pain in my buttocks. I didn't understand what bit me that could pierce through 2 layers of thick trouser fabric. Then we just sat there waiting until morning, still no order to open fire. In the morning, we were ordered to withdraw. The brothers breathed a sigh of relief, but still wondered why we didn't fight. Was it because the enemy was too numerous, so we let them pass? Damn it, finally we found out. It turned out the guard heard a rustling sound on the dry leaves, exactly like a marching army, so he sounded the alarm. But waiting until dawn, the rustling sound of the marching army was still there. The unit sent people to the source of the noise. It turned out that the sound like a large marching army was the sound of a swarm of forest termites eating leaves. The cruel thing was that these forest termites were also very disciplined, meaning they didn't eat like house termites, but all pecked down on the dry leaves simultaneously in waves, causing a sound exactly like a marching army. This was the first time I knew what Central Highlands forest termites were. Finally, my unit was brought up to the stationing post. The stationing place was the forest edge of a bald hill. Cutting trees, digging bunkers for sleeping, and avoiding artillery took several days to finish. The rainy season had begun here, so it was very sad. At twilight, the scenery was truly poetic, grassy fields stretching from one hill to another, occasionally dotted with a few tram bough bushes. On the hillside was the edge of the old-growth forest, here and there dotted with rows of rose myrtle turning purple when in season. Inside the forest, it was gloomy with many ancient trees and dense vines, many as thick as a wrist or calf. The hills were pockmarked with many bomb craters not yet green with grass, their mouths gaping wide, easily 100 meters across. Then there were bomb craters drilled deep enough to know how fierce the war was. I started the night guard shifts. Because the unit was newly established, the troop strength was abundant, so each shift had 2 people. Although there were 2 people, we still felt tense because of the stories we had heard before. That night, 2 of us were guarding. The sky was dim. Suddenly black clouds rolled in, making the sky pitch black. I tried holding my hand in front of my face, but saw nothing. I whispered to IU, in this weather, if they creep in, we're done for. The 2 of us lay flat on the ground, so that if the enemy entered the area, they would be easier to see. Suddenly, THUDIU, said I. I'm shooting, I whispered. Wait. Why hasn't it exploded? Maybe it's a dud. Let's wait for them to crawl in. If we shoot first, they'll know our position and we're toast. So the 2 of us lay waiting forever without seeing any movement. We remembered we had been guarding for a long time. Someone came to relieve us. We handed over the situation and went to the bunker to sleep. But our sleep was fitful. As soon as dawn broke, the 2 of us ran out to where the thud sound came from last night to find the grenade. But searching forever, we only found a forest fruit with bite marks from a bat. It turned out the bat had played the grenade throwing game, not the Pol Pot troops. Once, while sleeping soundly, I was woken up by gunfire at the battalion headquarters. So I lay waiting to see if support was needed. Waiting for a while, I fell asleep. In the morning, asking about the health situation at the battalion headquarters and why there was gunfire at night, it turned out the guard was alone and fell asleep. When he startled awake, he saw a tram bow tree moving. He was so scared he shouted the password west, but before the tree could reply, he fired a burst. The early days on the battlefield are confusing like that. Then, once the battalion scouts went to survey the terrain near the stationing area and discovered at Momokzoi Hill, named so because it looked like a tray of sticky rice, there were a few enemy soldiers loitering. Believing it, Company 1 immediately sent a platoon to attack. That day, machine guns and 61mm mortars were reinforced for Platoon 2 to attack. Mortars pounded machine guns, swept infantry charged. The enemy only fired back a few weak bursts and disappeared. Upon inspecting the battlefield, there were only a few shaped bunkers and 1 or 2 pots left behind. Platoon 2, with an M60 machine gun and a 60mm mortar, was assigned to stay and hold the position because there would be a communication and supply route from the regiment to the battalion here. The brothers started digging trenches for the outpost position. Here, for the first time in my life, I knew what rheumatism was, even though I was young. Having been at the outpost for more than a month, one day while joking with a friend, he chased me and I had to run. But strangely, my legs no longer obeyed my control and they collapsed. It felt like in a dream where someone is chasing you but you can't run. I understood it was the consequence of sleeping in underground bunkers for a long time, and it was the damp, rainy season. I shuddered, thinking if the enemy attacked strongly now and the brothers abandoned the post, I would become a hero because I dared to stay and fight to the last breath. My company was stationed about 2 kilometers from border post number 8, and at that time it seemed Battalion 2 or the regiment headquarters was stationed near the tea garden, so about every week or 10 days the company would let a few brothers go pick tea to drink. The Daklak border region is truly the homeland of leeches. Every time we waded through the forest looking down at the ground, we saw them standing up like spikes, pointing their heads towards the footsteps, just placed and then quickly somersaulting towards us. But the most dreaded were the leaf leeches. Just walking past snap and they stuck right to your shoulder, head or neck. If you weren't quick to pull them off and throw them away, you'd lose a lot of blood. Many soldiers groaned. I eat rice with salt to get a few drops of blood and you suck it like this. What's left, moreover, the tea garden was full of leaf leeches. So every time we picked tea to dry, one hand picked tea and the other had to pick off leeches, so they wouldn't have time to suck blood. This was the first time I drank tea and knew how high tea could get you. It turned out that the guys from Angel Tin, every time they brewed it, stuffed both leaves and twigs into a dry ration tin, then boiled it until it evaporated to about 1/4 of the tin, then brought it out to drink. At that time the water looked thick like traditional herbal medicine. If you weren't used to it, it made you very uncomfortably drunk. Standing, sitting, or lying down were all restless. In the border mountains and forests, besides a few specialties like GI fruit, GM fruit, sim fruit, trambo fruit, taro thuk latau bay vegetables, and kai choi vegetables, there was nothing else edible. Once, while patrolling the road, I saw a fruit about the size of a thumb eaten clean by birds, leaving only the shell. Thinking that if birds could eat it, humans could too, we gathered all the seeds and roasted them like GM seeds. Then we cracked them open to eat the kernel inside. It was flurry and nutty like jackfruit seeds. After 2 or 3 days of exploitation, they ran out. A friend, craving too much, picked the fresh fruit on the branch and scraped off the outer shell. He ate about 5 or 6 fruits, then felt nauseous and dizzy. The brothers were so scared they dragged him down to the stream to rinse his mouth and induce vomiting. Fortunately, after more than an hour, he returned to normal. Since then, we stopped daring to eat indiscriminately. In the border region during the rainy season, the basalt soil was slippery. The brothers remembered the song The Truong Sun Cane, so each had a cane to walk. It was truly effective. As for water, we had to take the plastic bag used for crossing rivers, put it in the backpack to carry water. With a cane in hand, we walked briskly. Since moving up to the outpost here, we felt relieved because there was no more studying. In our free time, we went into the forest to hunt green pigeons or coyote catbirds. Occasionally, we went on sweep operations in company or battalion formation, but rarely encountered the enemy. But here there was a huge obsession, punji stakes and mines. Stakes of all kinds, bamboo stakes, iron stakes, board stakes. As for anti-personnel mines, there were only 2 types, KP2 and K58. Since the time Regiment 1 relieved Border Post 8, the enemy no longer attacked or ambushed us. They withdrew deep into the interior and actively planted stakes and mines around our stationing areas. These guys were very strong. One of them could carry a back basket full of stakes as big as our large baskets and cross streams and hills swiftly. Once a patrol team detected and fired at a distance of only about 10 meters, but the enemy dropped the basket of stakes and ran away. Mines here were planted densely. If we triggered a KP2, death was certain, but stepping on a K58, it would strip the flesh up to the knee or thigh. If not killed by debris hitting vital spots, it was hard to survive severe blood loss before being carried back to the regimental infirmary. That was because our brothers were too new, so when a comrade had their flesh torn apart, blackened by smoke, looking very scary, they panicked and applied the tourniquet incorrectly, leading to death from blood loss. Most deaths were like that. After 6 months of living with stakes and mines at the border, my unit withdrew to Nanko Airfield to prepare for the coming days, yielding the holding position to a friendly unit. Marching to the Bubong Junction and Route 14, the brothers felt a pang of sadness, because just the other day this was a patch of green forest, but now a small cemetery had appeared with a few dozen graves, some still new grass, not yet grown. The friends of Regiment 812 left the game too early. The sadness was because upon returning to Nanko, what would we say to the families of the soldiers who died at the border? That feeling was heavy. The days of rest at Bubong Airfield seemed peaceful, but one morning, from the direction of the forest edge near the runway, a flash of light appeared, then a black object like the battalion headquarters GMC truck rose high into the sky, followed by an explosion echoing through the mountains. So the fate of stakes and mines followed us even here. It turned out that, as usual, the battalion headquarters truck went into the forest by a trail to get firewood. Luckily that day on the way back, because the truck was full of wood, the soldiers gathering wood had to walk. Otherwise, the casualties would have been higher. That anti-tank mine blew the whole engine block of the truck into the sky. The driver's legs were crushed. Sadly, after months of treatment, the driver did not survive due to infection. After the ceremony to establish Division 309 at Nanko Airfield, we were moved by motorized vehicles to Gia Lai Kontum to reinforce the front there. The trucks turned onto Route 19B heading towards Tha Nan. The first sight that greeted us at this front was the gigantic prefabricated warehouses I don't remember which units inside of which bright red coffins were stacked neatly almost to the roof. I suddenly remembered a sentence a friend in the unit wrote on his hat for fun: when I go no one sees me off / when I return 8 men carry me. Unlike the quietness in the area of Border Post 8, the Thun and Duck Co border gate area was bustling. Vehicles and artillery were busy groups of soldiers entering and leaving. They were also brothers and sisters of the youth volunteer force, setting up tents along both sides of the road, no different from the images I saw in movies about the anti-US war. It made me feel nauseous and nervous. Then the unit crossed the Ode Ford to replace a friendly unit. A mountain region that looked heartbreaking. Almost no life remained here. Trees were ragged and withered because their trunks were full of shell marks. Even a tree the size of a wrist had to take hundreds of fragments. Moreover, it was the dry season here which accentuated the fierceness. The unit stopped in a forest area next to a trail to wait for the handover. Here it was full of oro thorns and quit thorns. The days were scorching hot, the nights biting cold. But the sensation of heat and cold couldn't suppress the anxiety of approaching a new combat environment. Not far ahead, the booming of artillery and mortars echoed, mixed with the sound of axe. Occasionally there were a few bung bin sounds. The trail leading to the outpost became busier in the afternoon, with people coming and going. Stretchers made of hammocks were occasionally carried out. Every now and then groans came from the hammocks. Luckier soldiers walked heavily with bandages on their bodies. Guns were also carried out: B-40, B-41 light machine guns, heavy machine guns. A group stopped to rest, carrying even company-level firepower. We took the opportunity to get acquainted and ask about the situation. I blurted out, "Why don't you leave the M60 machine guns there to use?" They replied indifferently, "Ran out of gunners." A chill ran down the spines of the gunners about to take over the post. Finally, I got to take over the outpost at Hill No Name. During this time, I didn't know where Company 2 and Company 3 were stationed. Upon reaching the outpost, I did a round, then sat down and talked to my knees. "How did you hold the post so it's this ragged? Because they fought over it too much." "Who fought us and them? Both sides used artillery first, infantry later, so how could it not be torn to shreds? Artillery couldn't strip all these tiny trees. When the infantry fought, they used anti-tank weapons and fired at the tree stumps to spray us with shrapnel. That's why." So that's it. While busy chatting with my knees, the order came: go dig new bunkers and fortifications. Don't use the old ones. They have all the coordinates. So I had to continue digging. How boring. The days at this outpost were quite peaceful because the units took turns attacking the enemy from afar, so they only fired random artillery and mortars and direct fire at max range. Then, after peaceful days of holding the outpost, we handed it over to a friendly unit to continue on the road to participate in the campaign to liberate Cambodia. For the first time, roasting rice was exhausting. Each guy made himself an elephant intestine, a long tube of rice. The diligent ones roasted over low heat, so the rice was crispy. The hasty ones used high heat to be quick, so when eating they broke their teeth and it still wasn't crushed. After preparation, the unit began to march. The initial target was Palin. After that, the unit continued to sweep deep into the forest along the axis leading to Boko town. In this section, Comrade Tien Dung's Company 3 encountered the enemy the most. Perhaps the enemy wanted to split Battalion 1's formation to easily destroy us. After Regiment 31 advanced along the axis with the support of T-54 tanks to liberate Boko town, Battalion 1 was ordered to march urgently along the road into Boko. Cutting from the forest to the road, a scene was truly mournful. On the road surface, there were vehicles still smoking from mines or being shot at, including civilian vehicles that participated in transporting goods for the front. Here and there, groups of youth volunteers sat silently haggard. Taking advantage of the break while waiting to regroup for the march, we struck up conversations with the civilian drivers. They recounted one day we were ordered to go on an unexpected mission, prepare personal items for a month. So we set off not knowing where we were going or what we were doing. Only when we reached the Dukko border did we know we were serving the campaign to liberate Cambodia. Getting here, some died, some were injured. They looked so pitiful. After regrouping, we continued marching into Boko. Throughout my military career, dry rations for marching were roasted rice. Later, it became a bit more luxurious with some packaged roasted sorghum. As for sugar, It was of the South African diamond type, not the ruby type, carrying bags of roasted rice. Yet on the last day before being ordered to the road to receive food, it was all gone. Starving, I looked for a compatriot with weak teeth who couldn't chew, so there was some left, and held out my hand to beg for a bit. The area east of Route 19B extending was mostly old-growth timber forest. Nearing Lomfat, there were dipterocarp forests. Only a few days yet tanks and mechanized vehicles of all kinds had churned up the road surface, creating a dust layer tens of centimeters thick. So the enemy easily planted anti-tank mines. Just throwing a mine on the road, it sank deep into the ground. A gust of wind blowing over erased the trace immediately, no need for camouflage. So mechanized vehicles had to line up in a single file to wait for engineers to clear mines before daring to inch forward, and had to drive exactly in the tracks of the vehicle ahead. The battalion, after days of wading through the forest, got to march by mechanized vehicles, so we were relieved for a stretch. In the convoy of vehicles tailing each other, inching forward, suddenly a GMC driver, carrying a full load of rice, impatiently steered out to pass because he saw the road was empty. The guys on my truck just said, "This guy will definitely eat a mine." And sure enough, BOOM dust billowed. The front of the truck was thrown to the side. Fortunately, the truck was only carrying rice, no soldiers. We didn't know if the driver lived or died because the convoy continued to tail each other forward. Being the lead battalion, we had to take trucks to reach the assembly point in time to fight according to the combined arms plan. From Boko to Lomfat Battalion, one would attack along the mechanized axis. After arriving in Boko Battalion, one assumed the mission of maneuvering to attack and liberate Lomfat. This march was supported by both T-54 and T-59 tanks. The day before, in my mind, I imagined the scene of infantry spread out horizontally with tanks in the middle, charging forward just like in war movies. The next day on the road, about 10 tanks were already lying there looming. On the turret was a 12.7mm gun. In front was a 100mm gun. Truly valiant. After the order to arrange the formation, all infantrymen sat around the turret, not walking as I thought. Each tank had nearly 10 guys. Infantry commanders sat inside M113 armored personnel carriers. We started to worry. Fighting in this formation made it very easy to eat B-40 and B-41 rockets. Not to mention, if they used small arms to strafe horizontally, the infantry would take it all. After the formation was arranged, the tanks started moving faster and faster. Infantry could only sit on the two sides of the tank on the fenders. Behind was the exhaust pipe, so we couldn't sit there. It was truly miserable because one hand held the gun, the other had to hold onto the spare tracks tied around the turret to avoid falling. The tank ran fast. Trees on both sides of the road competed to hit the infantrymen's heads, thump thump. Some guys lost their helmets because they had no hands left to hold them.